Hello everyone and welcome to our lecture 19 on CIMA P3 performance strategy. This one was on options and swaps. So options first of all. First question, what is an option? So an option is a right but not an obligation to buy or sell a currency at a certain price called the exercise price in the future. Okay, so you're buying the right to buy or sell a currency at a certain price in the future, but you're not obliged to use that right. You can let it lapse. So why is that? Well, if the movement is favourable, you won't exercise the option, you'll let it lapse. If the movement in the spot rate is adverse, well then you'll exercise your option because that would be the better thing to do. So that's your choice at the end. Do you exercise your option or do you let it lapse? So how does this actually work? Well, there are two types of option. There is a call option. A call option is the right to buy the underlying currency, or there is a put option, and the put option is the right to sell the underlying currency. Why do we not just say buy and sell? Well, you always buy an option, whether it's an option to buy a currency or an option to sell a currency. You always buy that option for a premium. You pay a premium for the option. So you either buy a call option or a put option. An easy way to remember this is that you put your house up for sale, so a put option is a sell option. How do you calculate your gains and losses then? Well, the gain on an option will be the first thing you calculate, and then you have to subtract your premium. Remember that you always pay the premium whether you exercise the option or not. You have to pay the premium. So, the calculations then. First things first, do I want a call or a put option? How do I decide this? Well, you look at the transaction that you're going to undertake, i.e. the receipt or the payment in the foreign currency, and say, will I buy or sell my base currency? And do the same for your option. So if you're receiving $10 million and you're a UK company, think about the pound. You're receiving dollars, so you're going to buy pounds with your dollars, so you will buy an option or use a call option. So once we've decided that, we choose our expiry, which will be the same as our future, i.e. the first one after our transaction date. We then choose a strike price. Strike price will be determined usually by the premium you have to pay. Choose the one with the lowest premium. And then choose how many contracts, and that's just done the same way as the futures. Now, the question is whether or not to exercise your option. And the only way to do that is to calculate how much you're going to receive using the option and compare it to how much you'll receive using the spot rate. Remember that even if you use the spot rate, you'll still have had to pay your premium for your option, so you must subtract that. To calculate a premium, if you're not given the premium in the question, you can calculate your premium as your futures price less your options price, and that's your premium per base. Now, a key thing in options is that you'll have an over or an under hedge. Now what I mean by this is because you're using a standard contract size, there'll be a little bit at the end that you won't be able to hedge. So calculate the number of contracts, check what exposure you have covered and therefore what exposure you have uncovered, and at the end the exposure uncovered must be converted at the spot rate. Do plenty of examples of this to make sure that you understand that. So calculate your number of contracts at the start, see what exposure you have covered, and that will tell you what exposure you have uncovered, and that exposure will have to be converted at spot at the end of the hedge. So, on to a bit more about options, just a little bit of terminology. In and out of the money, if you're told in the question that an option is in the money or out of the money, what does that mean? Well, in the money means simply that it's better to use the option. So if the option is in the money, it's better to use the option. If it's out of the money, it's better to use the spot rate. If it's at the money, well then it's exactly the same as the spot rate. So just a little bit of terminology in case it would come up in the exam. Pros and cons of using options then. Well, the pros are that it's an effective hedge. It does what it's supposed to do. You have many choices of currencies and strike rates, strike prices, and it can lapse if not used, i.e. you're not tied into actually using it. However, on the downside, it's only available in the US, so you'll have to convert things to dollars like your premium, and you have to pay a high premium for an option. How is the premium set then? Well, something called the Black-Scholes model is on the syllabus here. There are 5 elements to the Black-Scholes model, and they are split down again into 2 sections. So the factors or sections are, first of all, the intrinsic value of the option. This will be determined by the price of the underlying asset, i.e. the spot rate if we're looking at currency options, and the strike price that you have chosen on your option. So that's the exercise price of the option. Is it in or out of the money? That will determine some of the intrinsic value of the option. The other element to the Black-Scholes model is the time value of the option. This will take in the volatility of the underlying, i.e. how much does the price of that underlying asset go up and down on a daily basis. The more variable that underlying asset is, well then the more likely your option is to be in the money, and therefore the higher the value of your option. Also, the time to expiry of your option will be a factor. The longer time it is to expiry, the more value your option will have, again because it's more likely to come into the money. The risk-free interest rate, this will also determine the price of your option, simply because the choice is to either use an option or to actually buy the underlying. If you don't buy the underlying and you use an option, you're deferring the payment. And what will you do? You'll put that money in the bank and you'll earn interest on it. So if the risk-free interest rate goes up, well then it's more advantageous for you to use the option. So if the interest rate is high, then use a call option, because it's better to use than the underlying, because you're tying up your money by buying the underlying. Okay, on then to currency swaps. Very simple, you're simply swapping your currency risk with another party. So you're borrowing at a favourable rate. You're then exchanging your principal with that other party. You're exchanging the amount that you've actually borrowed. You then pay the interest due on the amount that you've borrowed to the bank, and exchange your interest amounts paid with the counterparty. You then swap back the principal at the end, so you've simply swapped the amount that you're actually having to pay. The only way to really understand a swap is to go through an example, which I don't have the facility to do here. So go through plenty of examples and make sure you understand how a swap actually works. The pros and cons of using a swap. Well, the pros are that you can actually hedge your risk very effectively. You have access to markets that you maybe wouldn't have otherwise, and you can actually get a very good interest rate. It's also cheap, very few transaction costs on a swap, and it can be done over the long term. Some of these other models, swaps or the options and the futures, are really only short-term hedges. A swap is a more long-term hedge. On the downside, well, you have a credit risk if your counterparty doesn't pay what is due, and you have market risk, i.e. if the market rates go against you, it could actually harm you. Also sovereign risk, i.e. that a country gets into trouble and their foreign exchange currency goes very far down, and that could affect the value of your swap. Okay, so that was our lecture on options and swaps.